Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another Reedsy Live, Reedsy's ongoing collection of webinars designed to help you, authors, writers of all stripes, learn how to write, edit, publish, and market better books. I'm going to be joined a little bit later by Jeff Lyons, who comes highly recommended to us by one of our previous presenters, Caroline Levitt. Before we start, would you like to tell us a bit more about your background, your history of publishing and writing and such?
I've been in the entertainment, movie, and TV industry mostly since about 1986, but I've also been very involved with the publishing industry the last 15 years, especially the self-publishing revolution, as they call it, but also traditional publishing. I'm a traditionally published author. I have my own self-publishing imprint, Story Geeks Press. And a lot of what I've learned over the years doing this for as long as I've been doing it are that there's some real correlations now between long form prose, which most of you are writing, and screenplay structure and all of that. So I bring a lot of those skill sets to the table, especially television. So I've been at this for a long time, and I teach through UCLA. I teach through Stanford University's School of Continuing Ed. I teach a course there with Caroline Levitt, who I highly recommend. So I've got a lot of teaching experience in the area of story structure, particularly. I'm not a creative writing guy. I mean, I write, I'm a good writer, but my skill set really is story. And we're going to talk a bit about that, because what we're talking about today is a story problem, not a writing problem. The problem we're going to discuss today is a very hard problem for a lot of writers. And when do we start the PowerPoint? We have a little technical challenge here with computer compatibility and stuff. So we're going to be showing the PowerPoint remotely. So I'll say next slide when we go to the next slide. Next slide. This is a very hard problem. And what you're going to be getting in this course for free is you're going to get the PowerPoint presentation. And you're going to get 3 worksheets, because I don't want to just leave you hanging with all this information. What I'm going to be going through today is a scratching the surface of a very big topic, which is actually an entire chapter 12 in my latest book, Rapid Story Development: How to Use the Enneagram Story Connection to Become a Master Storyteller. This little webinar we're doing today is based on that chapter where I go into all this in gory detail. But again, I don't want to just throw all this information at you and just kind of leave you hanging. So I'm giving you some tools that you can use, including this PowerPoint and the webinar you'll have, which you can go back and listen to, and then use the tools in conjunction with over and over again. And you will actually have a process you will be able to take away with you and learn. If you don't ever buy my book, that's fine. I'm not pushing the book. You can actually get something out of this concretely if you work through these worksheets, go back and listen to this webinar, and listen to all my explanations and definitions and so on. Everybody hates PowerPoint presentations. So unfortunately, there's no way to do this without showing you some diagrams and talking some of this stuff through a PowerPoint. Okay, I'm not the PowerPoint guy. I want to teach you something. Okay, next slide. As I said, this is an incredibly hard problem. And the reason it's a hard problem is because it's not a writing problem, and people approach it as a writing problem. It's a story problem. What do I mean by that? Story and writing are 2 completely different things. I'm going to pause there, let that settle in for a bit, because this is very confusing to people. Storytelling does not need writers. Stories can be told in a lot of different ways, and you don't have to be anywhere near a piece of paper and a pencil or a word processor. They can be danced, they can be mimed, Marcel Marceau, they can be painted, they can be sculpted, they can be acted. Stories need storytellers, they don't need writers. Writing is a whole other animal, whole different talent, whole different skill set. The problem of the middle is a problem because people approach it as a writing problem and they think they're going to write themselves through it. That's not how it works. It's a story development problem. And most writers are good writers. Most of you are probably very good writers, but your storytelling skill set is probably on the weak side. That's not a judgment I'm trying to make about you. I'm just saying that's how it is. With thousands of people I've worked with, almost everybody is weak on the story development craft side because that's not something that's taught in creative writing programs. You just taught, write. Writer's right. Just go write. Don't edit. Don't stop yourself. Just go. First draft's always a piece of crap. Don't worry about it. Yeah, you need to worry about it because only the people who have a really natural talent for story can get away with doing that, like, Ian McEwan or Stephen King, who could knock out a first draft in 6 weeks. And he thinks everybody should do that. Well, no, everybody shouldn't do that because they're not good at story and they're going to get drowned in the story floodplain. Okay, that's why the middle is so critical because it is a story development issue, not a writing problem. Next slide. And here's the other reason why it's so important. The middle is your story. I mean, that's the story. The first quarter and the last quarter, as important as they are, beginnings and endings, right? Everyone's good with the beginning and everybody's good with the ending. And then they go, now what the heck do I do? The middle is where all the action is. It's where we learn about who the protagonist really is as a character. It's where the whole adventure of the story is going to unfold beat by beat by beat, leading to that great ending you came up with. It's how we unfold all the subplots. If you're writing a novel, you're going to need subplots. That's a whole other webinar, by the way. You're going to have to write subplots, and they all weave in and out. This is where readers end up loving or hating the characters and the book. It's the middle. That's why this is so hard. And because people don't develop their stories first, and they think they can write through this problem, they find themselves snagged on all these issues. If you don't develop your story, you will not have a good middle. So what will you have? Next slide. Let's define this thing you're going to end up with. What does mushy mean? You're going to end up with episodic writing. Okay, what does episodic writing mean? It means your character comes up into a situation, they solve the problem, over. Next problem, come up against a new opponent, fight it out over something, win the day or not, problem over, next one. And you go through these little episodes through the middle. How many of you can relate to that? Okay, it's like watching a tennis ball in a tennis match going back and forth. You don't ever spend enough time in any one episode to really get invested as a reader. And this is also a problem with how you have disconnected subplots, because you have all this episodic writing filling in for a stream of narrative that should be one long through line, which you can only get by planning it out structurally. Like I say, there's no clear story structure, which we're going to get into in a second. As a result of all this episodic writing and no planning, there are vague stakes and very weak or no building of dramatic tension or comedic tension. That's missing. There's no good cause and effect that's built up to have good, solid scene progression, which also adds to the episodic quality. And the worst of the worst of the worst is you end up with a passive protagonist, which we're going to talk about near the end. Active versus passive protagonists. Whenever you just jump into the writing of the middle and not really know what it is you're trying to do, you're going to end up with a character who's just getting thrown around by events rather than driving them dramatically. That's where the passive protagonist is. The reason you have to care about this is if you don't do this stuff, if you don't accomplish solving these problems, you're going to lose your readers. And you're going to be so frustrated as a writer, you're going to want to throw your manuscript out the window. And you don't want to get into this position after writing 200 to 300 pages of a novel. And then you have to end up going back, and this is what everybody does. I call it backing into your story. You end up with a couple 100, 300 pages, the wheels come off the cart, and you go, what the heck? And everybody does the same thing. You start following the breadcrumbs backwards. Everybody, including me, ends up in the exact same place to solve the problem. Where do you think that is? It is the beginning. It is the premise itself, the idea. That's where the stories go bad if they're going to go bad first. The next place they go bad is the middle. Okay, next slide. I'm going to talk fast. I'm sorry. I got to get through a lot of information. So if you get lost, know that all this will be given to you and you can go through it in your own timing, in your own space, in a safe place someplace. But I got a lot of stuff to cover here. This is how you avoid the mushy middle. Now there's a whole lot more going on here that I'm going to talk about, but if you just can get your head wrapped around these two things, the classic story engine and the narrative engine, and we'll talk about these other patterns, the decline in elevation, just very, very briefly. If you can just think about getting your mind into a place where you're following along with these two pieces, you will be assured, not guaranteed, there are no guarantees, you will be assured that you will not have a mushy middle. It may not be great, but at least it's going to be a solid structural process that you can go back and fix much more easily than winging it and going on a lot of guesswork. Okay, so let's look at these. Next slide. Here we go. Okay, first one is the classic story engine. This relies on classic story structure principles. If you do not know story structure, go learn it. From me, I've got a whole book on it, Anatomy of a Premise Line, or from anybody else you want. I don't care where you go. Learn classic story structure. What do I mean by classic? The story guru zoo is very crowded right now and very loud. There's a lot of noise out there, a lot of snake oil. Throw a stone, you're going to hit somebody teaching some process. What I have tried to do over the years is take the 5 or 7 most common story structure pieces that everybody talks about, regardless of the proprietary language, and hammer that down into a workable idea of structure that is common to all stories, because that's what's happened. Everybody who teaches this stuff is all teaching the same basic stuff. Okay. Oh, push my book again. Anatomy of a Premise Line. That's the one you need to get. Thank you. Everybody's teaching the same basic ideas. And then it gets all noisy and frantic because everybody's adding all their proprietary stuff on top of it. Okay. And it gets very confusing. So this is just the nature of the beast. You're going to have to kiss a lot of frogs to find your prince. Okay. And that's okay. I mean, that's good with therapists. It's good with new cars, all that kind of, it's a good strategy. My motto is listen to everyone, try everything, follow no one. You are your own guru. This is on you. This is your responsibility to learn this stuff. Nobody else is going to do it. You've got to do it. But it's out there. It's absolutely out there. Well, can you keep that slide big? Yeah. Okay. So let's go through this slide real quick, because this is what almost everybody who talks about the middle of a book or a story talks about, is this piece. And these are the core components that if you think about your middle structurally, and not just in terms of what's happening beat-wise, action-wise, but think of it as a structure, you will be so much farther along this curve. Okay, we're just going to look at this piece. Inciting incident. Most of you are going to know what some of these things are, but a couple of them know. The inciting incident is what kicks off your novel. It's the thing that happens that takes your protagonist from where they are in their life at the beginning of the book, usually at chapter 3, chapter 4 at the latest, somewhere around there. Excuse me. And an event that happens, and they go, oh, okay, I've got to go over there now. And everything switches. And now we're off to the races. Okay, that's the inciting incident. It needs to be something consistent with their character. We're going to talk about this in a little bit when we get into moral component. But that's the beginning of your middle, essentially. And then you have reversals, complications, which you've probably all heard about. You need at least 2 or 3 of those, where you set up an expectation and then you reverse the expectation. You know, the robber ends up being, the good guy or something like that, or some complication. Then you come to this midpoint in your novel. 2 things need to happen. The community stakes need to rise, and the personal stakes for the protagonist need to rise. What do I mean by that? I'm going to give you a silly example. Bob and Mary are secret agents chasing the terrorists in Lower Manhattan. Bob discovers that the terrorist has a bomb and it's going to go off in a subway station and it's going to kill hundreds of people. Then at the midpoint, he discovers, oh my gosh, it's not just a bomb, it's a dirty bomb. And tens of thousands of people are going to be killed. The community stakes have now risen. There's more danger, there's more jeopardy for everyone in the story. And then at the same time, or very close proximity in terms of pacing, Bob also discovers that the terrorist is really his old buddy Ben from the SEALs who's gone rogue and who he's going to have to shoot. But he's also Mary's brother who's, having a love affair with Mary. So if he kills Mary's brother, it could have put the love affair in jeopardy. So now he's got a new problem. Not only is everybody going to die, but he could lose his lover. So both of these things happen very close to one another. The community stakes rise for everyone in the story, the jeopardy rises, and the new threat rises for the protagonist. Okay. That's your midpoint complication. Incredibly hard to do. Most people only get the first one. They don't ever link back or link forward to the character component where it creates more danger personally for the protagonist. If this is the only piece you ever accomplish in your middle of your story, you will create more unity just with that one piece. Then another complication down the line you want to come to, which we'll talk about in a minute, and then you come up to the doom moment. Okay, everyone kind of knows about this intuitively, or if you don't, you know it from some story structure school, right? The visit to death, the all is lost moment. Every TV show, every movie, every book you've ever read has this moment. But it's a critically important moment that you are writing to that. So rather than thinking about just writing events, you're writing to these moments. You're trying to write to the story structure beats. Don't think in terms of acts. Acts are going to get you nowhere. We can talk about that if you want in the Q&A. I am not a proponent of 3-act structure or 5-act structure or any act structure. Acts are really not useful. But what is useful is taking these, creating these points of structure in the middle and writing to those. That's what gives you a form and a foundation to work with. The doom moment is the moment when the protagonist looks like they've lost. Yes, yes, yes. And the bad guy's going to win. Yes, yes, yes. But it's also the point where they realize, oh my God, I can't keep going the way I'm going. If I do, all will be lost. I will not get my goal. I will lose the money. I will not get the girl. I will not whatever. But worse, I'm not going to change. I've got to be a different person here. I can't do business as usual. They don't know what that looks like yet. They don't know what that means, but they know they've got to do it differently now if they're going to get through this crucible. That's the beginning of their change. They haven't changed yet. That doesn't happen until the final battle, and then they change. But that's the moment you want. It's not just a plot point, quote unquote, moment. It's a character moment where they have their first inkling. Oh my God, things have to be different. I've got to be different, but I don't know what that means, so I've got to figure it out. That's when lots of other things can happen. But that's the classic story structure middle that most people talk about. That's what most people have in their books when they write about this. That's what they talk about. What they're missing, the secret sauce that's missing, is the narrative engine piece. Okay? Same inciting incident, weaving in and out of all these other structure moments we just discussed are this pattern of decline up until the doom moment. This is something people don't think about, but I want you to really start thinking about it. As you're going through your story, your character has to be getting worse, not better. Worse can mean many things. It just might mean that they're getting more emotionally distant, or it means that they're, killing babies. It could be any kind of gradation, but they are not acting in a moral way, and they're in their fear mode. Okay. Then they come to that doom moment. They realize, oh my God, things have to be different. I have to be different. That's that pattern of elevation. They start climbing out of the emotional hole. They come to the truth moment where I have to change now. I know kind of what I have to do. I see who I've been. I see what I could be. What do I want to do? Michael Corleone picked the bad side. He went on to the dark side. He became the devil. Okay. And the Godfather. You don't have to have a happy ending. But it is this narrative engine that's so critical. And it's 22 minutes after, so I gotta talk fast. Whoops, almost knocked my thing down. So let me talk about now what it is that's actually operating during this middle component. Go to the next slide. The thing that's driving all of this is this thing called the moral component. Okay, Caroline talks about it in her webinar on structuring your novel. She talks about the moral flaw. Everybody talks about the moral flaw, but they don't tell you, what the heck this thing is and how you can get one. It's made up of these three things: moral blind spot, immoral effect, dynamic moral tension. The blind spot, and we all have blind spots. They're behaviors that we carry out day to day that we don't see, but everybody else sees. They're blind spots. We're blind to it. A moral effect is how we're carrying that blind spot out in the world in behavior that's hurting other people. That's the immoral effect. The effect of our blind spot is we are acting not in a nice way in the world. But dynamic moral tension is the story is constantly giving the character an opportunity to change, but they always make the bad choice. Okay, you've been being a real jerk here for 150 pages. You want to change now? Nope, can't do that. They haven't changed yet. They haven't gotten to that doom moment. So they're going to make a new choice out of that blind spot that's going to now create a new problem that will raise stakes. This is how you raise stakes in your stories. That every time they make a new choice to do something, it creates more problems for them because they haven't figured out what's motivating them. Perfect example I'm going to go through real quick is The Verdict, the movie The Verdict, even if you haven't seen it. Ambulance chasing lawyer outside of a funeral home, takes a swig of booze, goes inside, starts handing out his card. Sorry for your loss, sorry for your loss. They finally figure out this guy doesn't belong there and they kick him out. Okay. We see immediately how he's hurting other people. Okay. He's taking advantage of their pain. He's using them to get what value he can get out of them. And this is the same thing you do with your protagonist in your story. Once you know how they're acting badly in the world, what they're doing to hurt other people, you go, what would that person have to believe about people in the world to justify acting that way? Frank, in The Verdict, sees people as worthless and valueless, or they're real close to it. So he's taking and preying on them. He's taking advantage of them and preying on them because his worldview is people don't really have a whole lot of worth. Then you ask yourself about your protagonist, what would they have to think about themselves to justify having that kind of worldview? Frank's taking advantage of people because people don't have any value. Guess what? Frank's a people too. So he doesn't have any value. He doesn't have any worth. Thus his self-pity, thus his fall from grace, all the behaviors that he carries out in terms of hurting people in the world come from this fundamental belief about himself, which is wrong, that he has no value and doesn't have any worth in human dignity. And when you see the rest of the movie, you see that's exactly what's playing out throughout the rest of the movie. Okay? That's his blind spot. As long as he's operating from that point, every choice he makes to deal with problems will create new problems because it's not coming from the story. It's all coming from him. Next slide. That's what an active protagonist is. Okay, you can't really read this very well, but they have a blind spot. They're acting badly in the world, the immoral effect. That action creates a problem that they have to solve. They proactively make a choice to deal with it, but it creates a new problem, what I call proactive effect, a new problem. Okay, am I okay? No, I'm not. I'm going to go back and I'm going to make a new choice. Creates a new problem. Bloom, bloom, bloom. It's an engine that's constantly ratcheting up the drama for your character, all coming from the blind spot, all coming from them. They're actively creating their own hell. Okay. At some point, that truth moment, they go, okay, I can't do this anymore. They change, a new immoral effect, but it's actually a moral one to the left there, and the story's over. Or they go in the opposite direction, like Michael Corleone. No, I'm going to go deeper into my blind spot because I cannot see the truth here, and I'm terrified I'm going to get even worse now. Story over. Okay. But that's the engine I'm talking about. This character piece, this moral component, that is the narrative driver for the middle of every story. As long as your character is creating their own problems because of that moral blind spot that they've got to heal at the end and change, then you're going to have story beats in the other structure that are going to make dramatic sense and not just be stuff you're throwing in there because stuff has to happen. There's going to be a character basis for it. I hope this is making some sense. Next slide. This is what you have if you don't have an active protagonist. Problem, predicament, mystery. They make a choice. They do something. Is the problem solved? No. Next problem. Deal with it. It's a very this is the character who's a character with a leaf on the wind, getting pushed by events, and is basically just solving problems. They're not generating the dramatic interaction. They're reacting to a world that is pushing and forcing them to be active. They're not the ones driving the action. This is what I call a situation, not a story. This is what most people write. This is what most movies are. Not bad, not wrong, but not stories. Okay, it's a whole other conversation about how you have to deal with that. But understanding why the middle falls apart is because so many of the protagonists you write are passive characters. So they're always just coming up against problems, and you get episodic and you have the problems of the middle. But when they're connected through that narrative driver of the moral component, then your classic story structure is going to have a weave that goes through that's consistent and moves. Next slide. Oh, by the way, I see a little note here on short stories. It doesn't matter whether you're writing a 30-second TV commercial or Gone with the Wind or something that's 5,000 pages long. A story is a story. As long as they've got the components that make up a story, they will have these components in place. With short stories, you start as close to the end as you can, right? But you're going to have the same structure. There's going to be a desire line. There's going to be an opponent. There's going to be a dramatic question. There's going to be a growth moment, unless there isn't. Not every short story is a story. One of my favorite stories is the guy who wrote Ulysses. Oh my gosh, the Irish writer. I'm blanking. Finnegan's Wake. One of the greatest short stories ever written is The Dead. And the ending is, it's very quiet. It's the epiphany, the awareness of self that happens at the end. James Joyce, thank you. Thank you, Sheila. That's why short stories are so much fun, because they're so compressed, but you can do all this stuff in a short story that you can in a big novel. Okay. But in a novel, you've got the space. You can breathe. You can have subplots. You can have lots of characters. They're just so much fun for writers. Okay, back to the slides. So, summary. Learn the story engine. Learn the classic story structure piece of this. You can figure that out. You can just get any good structure book. It'll all be there for you. And then look at this, and just these are all the pieces that you need. You can add as many as you want. There's the hero's journey, for instance. It's got the circle with all the steps, blah blah blah. You can do that, but first understand the principles of what's driving the middle of any story. Then you can start layering that over all these other structures. Okay, the hero's journey is really only appropriate for the myth structure. It was created by Chris Vogler, who took it from a mythologist who wrote Hero with a Thousand Faces, Campbell, and based on his monomyth. But it was all about the myth structure, like Jason and the Argonauts. It doesn't really apply to love stories or action movies, or people have tried to layer it over them, but it's not appropriate. But this stuff I'm showing you it relates to every story. That structure, the classic story structure engine, will only be relevant will only work really, really well and be dramatically satisfying if you can add in that secret sauce of having them decline over the course of the middle and then elevate out based on learning the lesson of their moral component. What are they going to learn about themselves at the end that is going to change them as a person? That is critical. And that's what drives the character component of this across the middle. I know this is a lot. I know it's crazy making, but like I said, you've got the tools now. You've got the assists that we're going to give you. Go to Reedsy, watch this video over and over again. If you want to buy my book and read chapter 12, it breaks all this out in gory detail. Highly recommend it, but you don't have to. You don't have to. This is enough. If you just learn how to grok this, you will be so much happier. This isn't fun. Don't get me wrong. I'm not, I'm giving you the plague. Okay. This is very uncomfortable stuff, but it gives you very clear direction, and it's something you can always build on. And the more you do it, the better you get. The more you do it, the better you get. The easier it becomes, the more intuitive the tools become. You got to use this stuff. I have an ebook on my, I'm going to push this. It's Rapid Story Development ebook number 5 on the moral component, on narrative drive. It's a free ebook. It talks about all this moral component stuff in great detail. Go download that book and read it. It'll be a huge, huge tool for you. And it'll work really well coming back and looking at all this stuff as well. Okay. All right.
Jeff, thank you so much. This was so great. Like, judging by the comments, like, we all got so much out of this. It's a different way to look at story, and I think a lot of folks will be running to their keyboards straight after this. We'd love to have you on again at some point in the future. I'm sure I'll be in touch very soon. But yeah, until next time, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you again to Jeff. See you all soon.